Hi folks, you're with us today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the concept of how, or the practice even, of how the globalists have gone about demoralizing Western society through this barrage, this absolute wall barrage of propaganda, 24/7. We're just being bombarded with lies, and for the purpose of, in terms of how the Soviet communist agitators used to work, was to undermine confidence in our institutions, in our society. So when the globalists sort of sat down and had a look, say, well, what do we need to do first before we can take over the West and take over all the levers of power? What do we need to do first? Well, we're looking in the West at very high trust societies, a lot of social cohesion, a lot of trusted institutions, a lot of faith and trust in each other. That we, again, high trust society, a lot of belief in courts of law being independent, the public service being there to serve the public, the politicians representing the people, all these sorts of things, and they all contribute to a level of social trust that and I didn't realize until, as a quite a young man, I started traveling on business, and I was surprised just how low trust, on this is relative, of course, how low trust non-Western societies were, and people coming from non-Western societies had this very low trust thing that at first off, it caught me by surprise as a guy in his sort of early 20s. It caught me by surprise. I hadn't really seen that before, and didn't understand the basis for it or its origins and so on. And this was twofold. I didn't understand at that age why the West had such relatively high trust and why these other places had such relatively low trust. Indeed, in some places the trust is about zero. Now, the globalists looked at this and looked at this high trust Western society and thought, well, we can't do this takeover. We can't do the globalist takeover until we destroy this high trust. So we have to attack it from all angles. And really, it was very much the Soviet agitator undermine the West playbook, because their concept was we have to undermine the West to a certain point where communist revolution becomes possible. And to do that, we have to go after the education institutions. We have to create agitators and underminers, if you will, that are inside the tent, and we have to use them to destroy all faith and confidence and trust. And once that trust and faith and confidence and social cohesion, when it's reached a certain point, then it will be ripe for the revolution. Now, the revolution could be an armed revolution like the Bolsheviks in 1917, or it can be a revolution where just everything falls over. It just dies a natural death from being undermined from within for so long that it simply falls over. So they came at it from a number of angles, and the point of where it started is debatable, I guess. I didn't really notice it until in the United States. I started to notice it in some sort of serious, overt sense, say in the mid 1980s, somewhere around there. I started to sort of, it started to become noticeable. I'd look at articles in the New York Times, because all the hotels I stayed at, they'd always deliver the newspapers to the, this is pre-internet days, of course. They deliver the newspapers to the rooms, and the New York Times back then was like, it was huge. Had several parts and catalogues and everything, and it, as indeed did LA Times and other newspapers around the Philadelphia Inquirer and so on. But I started to notice it there. More in the Northeast, looking at, in, say, the newspapers in Texas, you wouldn't really see it. But the newspapers around New York and Boston and Philadelphia, you'd certainly start seeing it around there. So I've seen a little bit in Australia, this idea in the education system that minorities had to be given allocated, allocated, as in a quota, allocated, special outcomes for them in certain subjects at school. That was just starting to come in as I was finishing high school. There was a few wave-ins to university sort of beginning around that time, creating a few courses like peace studies or something like that. So that was beginning. But it was in the very early days, and it kind of didn't really encroach on anything. And I had no idea that it would it would turn from being a little sort of boutique issue into really controlling the whole thing. I'm going to have another coffee, so excuse me. It's my early morning coffee cough. So I just want to have a look at this. How expensive is it for the globalists to be running this propaganda machine, which is to undermine our society, to destroy confidence, faith, to demoralize. It's an expensive business, and the money has to come from somewhere. Now, if you look at all the major propaganda places, all the major propaganda places, Twitter was running at a vast loss. It was losing money. Where was the money coming from to keep Twitter alive when it was losing so much? It had an utterly incompetent management team. It was shot through with parasite ideologues. But yet you look at the money that the Yoel Roths and the what's the face for Jay Garday and those sort of people being paid, their severance packages and that sort of thing. These people are being paid in the millions, and yet if you look at them in the real world, they're Roth would have been a junior public servant. Garday would have been some sort of accountant clerk in some maybe working in some sort of tax servicing business in the outer suburbs. She was a nobody. Fuck. And the list goes on here, and yet they're paid millions. Now, what we've got is a situation where these people are paid millions because they're prepared to go out there and tell the most outrageous lies, push the propaganda, but more importantly, suppress alternative points of view. Any conservative point of view, there'd be a reason invented, or that this very unique interpretation of the guidelines that would we've got to shut even down, including removing a sitting elected president of the United States from the from the platform. So we're and if you look at the MSNBCs, the CNNs, the New York Times, the Jeff Bezos's newspaper in Washington, D.C. You look at all of these, and indeed, you look at any of the major newspapers and outlets around the place across the Western world. With rare exception, they're losing, not just losing a bit of money here and there, but losing a lot of money. So they're being subsidized. They're being given either government money, as in the case of Canada, propaganda outlets that can't survive on their own are being given government money to stay in business, or they're being subsidized through the back door by NGOs and charities. The one case where an NGO placed an advert in a newspaper, just a one-page advert in a newspaper here, and he paid something like $1 million for the page. So there's a whole network of propaganda and deceit and deception and lies and misinformation, disinformation and they're all funded. It's all being funded to stay in place. Now, if it had to exist commercially, just on a standalone commercial, does it make a profit or not? Then none of these outlets would exist, or hardly any. So 90% of the propaganda machine would just disappear overnight if they had to be commercial. Now, the whole basis for having a business is that it has to make money, or at least not lose the amount of money it is. Now, in some cases, bigger firms are buying up the media outlets, using them as propaganda, and then using cross write-offs of media outlets, using them as propaganda, and then using cross write-offs of taxation. So if division of the company is making a good profit, then they can simply write off their profits against the losses that are being incurred in the media unit. So that there's a bit of that goes on. There's nothing illegal about that, by the way. But the sole purpose of this loss-making media business is to push propaganda. That is the sole purpose of it. And you look at the many millions of dollars that the main propaganda pushers are getting paid, and it's quite remarkable. Clearly, pushing globalist propaganda in the case of social media, suppressing alternative views and opinions to the globalist narrative, handsomely paid jobs. I mean, wow, some of these people are being paid vast sums of money. No one's paying me $3 or $4 million a year to run around telling lies. So but they are. And we need to understand that, just how artificial the process is. They might as well all be government propaganda outlets, as in globalist controlled government. So I just wanted to sort of make that clear that commercially, in a supposed capitalist world that we suppose, capitalist economy we're supposed to have, commercially, none of these businesses could exist or would exist without this outrageous artificial subsidy from the taxpayer and from alleged charities which are donating through the back door. So similarly, there's a round robin of like a conga line of people. So a lot of the workers and the operatives and the worker bees in these places are actually employees of NGOs, activist employees of NGOs that are working for or working within these propaganda outlets, but being paid through various means. So some of the backroom operational costs are being dispersed across a wide array of NGOs, and indeed in some cases even government departments and universities and so on. So again, it's being these loss-making outlets, and they're still losing money even after all that. These loss-making outlets are. But if globalization propaganda had to survive by merit, it couldn't. Make no mistake on this, it couldn't. Nearly all of this would disappear if it had to survive. If it was a case of, do people want to watch this or listen to this or read this? Do people want to? And are they prepared to pay for it, or are advertisers prepared to put up the advert? And they're not. They wouldn't. So we need to understand that, just how artificial this propaganda is. But we can't deny its success. When I look at social trust and cohesion and faith in our institutions, when I was, say, not that long ago, even 25 years ago. So, like I'm sort of about 30 or something. So even that time, the amount of social trust then to what it is now, it's hard to believe that it took the globalists and the governments, Western governments they control, 25 years, less than 25 years, to go from high trust to much lower trust. In some cases, no faith or trust at all. Now, the other thing that the propaganda tries to do is, of course, to demoralize, but also reduce your ability to tell fact from fiction, right from wrong, and to try and move people into an ideological position, the climate change thing and Greta Thunberg and all that propaganda nonsense being a good example of it, to move people into an ideological understanding of the world rather than an understanding of reality or facts. And once you move people into an ideological understanding, then it's very, very difficult to shake them loose, no matter how many facts you put in front of them. For example, there's a lady in her 50s, and she'd be one of the first affirmative action college kids, I guess, back in the day, one of the first tranche of affirmative action college kids, and also affirmative action hiring and that sort of thing. So she's never really had to, face a situation where she's judged on any form of merit. And this is a very important part of creating people that are ideologically trained to think a certain way, absent of reality and facts. That affirmative action thing is an essential component of that, essential component of getting people to be unable to see the world from any form of reality. And so she, Trump's a Nazi, for example, and she's part of that crowd. So okay, well, why do you say Trump's? So she bases it on three things. Now, without any effort, I could 100% debunk every one of the what she claims is the basis for her claim, doing Trump's Nazi. So I completely debunked it and showing just how false and improbable, not improbable, just how completely false her understanding of those issues was. But her response is, well, I don't care how many, the facts don't really matter. But you said you were relying on facts. Well, no. So clearly she's taken an ideological position, then invented a reality to go around it, which is, again, the climate change thing and other things. Nazis are everywhere and white supremacists. Is you take an ideological position and then you cherry pick any situation that you say, well, that kind of justifies it. For example, straight white males are white supremacists, Nazis. All right, okay. Well, what's your logic for that? Well, Hitler was white. He was straight, and he was a Nazi. So anyone who's straight and white is a Nazi. There you go. Facts. I'm backing it up with serious facts. So that form of stupid, simplistic logic is how. But if you point out, well, hold on, Hitler's dead. It was dead a long time ago. He came from this place. He came from this. That's got nothing to do with it. Well, I don't care. Everyone's a Nazi anyway. So really, once they've got them ideologically captured, which is part of the demoralization thing, you can't tell right from wrong, or good from bad, fact from fiction, or reality from fantasy. Then you've effectively got a whole you've achieved a demoralization. If you can't tell reality from fantasy, you are by definition, I believe, demoralized, and you've lost not only faith in your community, your society, the institutions. You've lost faith in your own ability to make a decision and tell right from wrong. Now, I see this all across the business sector, and I see it maybe not every day, but certainly every second day, where people, remember the entire business landscape is now shot through with affirmative action hires, race, gender quotas, all this sort of thing. So we've got people that have achieved or needed to achieve nothing to get where they are. They've just been waved in as a part of a quota system. Now, people think that's socially beautiful or virtuous or something like that, but it's incredibly destructive because nobody knows what they're doing. Now, they're given a little checklist of things. Here's your checklist. You don't need to know anything. Here's your checklist, which is very much the prevailing wisdom in many places today. So that's all these people have got, their little checklist, which they sort of, clutch to their bosom as they scurry around pretending to be important. So when you're sitting down and talking to these sort of people, they've got no ability, no confidence, no faith in their own judgment to make any decision about anything that's outside of their little checklist. And they don't want to hand the decision off to someone else because that diminishes their importance, as they would see it. And they want to pretend that they're just as good as anyone that's really had to earn their stripes, but of course they're not. Most of them are so incompetent that you're left slack-jawed just to the whole thing. But this is all part of that process where these people simply have lost all faith in their ability to judge, decide, act, and are fearful of even attempting it, let alone trying to sit down and work on facts. Now, what they try and do to sort of work around this in ways is that everybody in the room is now a child. You are 8 years old and you're in school, you're a child, and we're going to go through this. Now, Billy Bob, how many apples, and they'll try and reduce it to a point where everyone is a child that knows nothing, and they'll try and work through processes in all sorts of interactions using effectively that model. But it's the model of people who have no confidence and have no faith. And that's something that really the globalists have come a long way. And effectively now the divide in the Western world is between the people who have been ideologically captured and those who have not. The ones who have been ideologically captured are in the globalist eyes, the good guys, because we can control you. The ones who have been ideologically not captured are mostly straight white males. And because of that, now they're all fascist, Nazi, white supremacists. They're all Hitler. And that's really where the dialogue's gone and where we're going. And the globalists have actually achieved a great deal, albeit with the complete complicity of our supposed elected representatives, our supposed independent, impartial public servants, our supposed independent courts, relying on due legal process and the rule of law, supposed independent police. But all of these institutions are now captured by the globalists, if not totally, certainly in majority part. You've been with Tassos today, your pushback channel. Thank you for this.